Greetings everyone, this is David the Real Midwife. When we're trying to investigate history in order to understand how the West ended up being this way, there's a lot of different viewpoints, there's a lot of different aspects that cause this, right? So a lot of people look at the politics, a lot of people look at uh, social issues and the like. But one aspect, one of the things that's not really focused as much, that is as important, is economics. Economics can be weaponized against social groups, right? Such as the family that I'm going to be focusing on today. And this video is essentially going to be a synthesis of two of the articles I've written for Republic Standard. Those articles and the sources I use for this video are going to be in the description below. So without further ado, let's begin. We're going to be covering two main things here. We're going to be covering well, not things, but topics. We're going to be covering second wave feminism, double income trap, and then we're going to be covering social security and welfare and how these are pretty much destroying the family unit and the West. So let's start with the double income trap. What even is this terminology? Where does it even come from? Well, I'm not really fully certain where it originally comes from, but this is a term that was employed by Elizabeth Warren, and she makes the argument that the family used to be dependent on a single person's income, right, the father. But now it is dependent on both the father and the mother. Now, how did that really happen? How did that ended up being this way? And she argues that it ended up being this way because women started working. That's really how it just started. She says that because women started working, this put pressure on wages, and what happens now is that families need to have both the husband and the wife to work. If even one of them does not work, you're not going to be able to sustain that family. So let's go more into detail on how this happened. Second wave feminism was all about equal rights to work, right? It was pretty much about how women need to have equal rights to work, how women are strong, independent women. They don't need no man. Well, they kind of need man, but they also need work, right? And the consequences of this has been tremendously catastrophic. If we look at what happened prior and after, prior to this, right, it was more of a patriarchal structure. There were still women working, but overall, working was a male-centered thing, right? It was a male thing to do. It was a man thing to do. It's a man's job to have a job. And then we have second wave feminism, the movement, and now women cannot be discriminated against. Women are encouraged by law. Okay, this is by the system. The system is encouraging them to work as well. And now women enter the workforce. Now think of it this way. This is a very simple supply and demand issue. You have a set supply of jobs, right? But now because of second wave feminism, you have a huge increase in the demand for jobs, right? So you have the same amount of employers when second wave feminism hits, but the amount of employees is increasing exponentially, and it really started hitting, the effects of second wave feminism really started hitting after the 70s, right? During mid 70s is when women really ended up going into the workforce, and it fully culminated itself in 1980s, and at that point it really started to become a norm. Like, seeing women in the workforce start to become more of a norm. And as I said, when women start to get into the workforce, they didn't get into the workforce as employers. They were pretty much all employees. And in real life, what really happens here is that, imagine that you're working at McDonald's and you're working with like 4 other people. You're making $10 per hour. And then second wave feminism hits. A lot of women are getting into the workforce. Well, what happens to you now? Not all, but a lot of women are just doing it because they want to be independent. But a lot of them are also they also have good intentions. They want to support their family, right? They just want to do a small job at the side and they want to support their family. So they come to the McDonald's and they say, I want to work here, uh, I'm willing to work for a lower pay. So instead of $10 like this dork does, I'm willing to do it for $5. It's really not that important. I already have a lot of money. I just want to support my husband. And the boss, his eyes turn to dollar signs, and he realizes that, wow, I can hire like six people. They're all willing to work for $5 per hour, and the amount of money I have to pay, it doesn't change. But now I have more workers, and because I have more workers, I have more productivity. This is the best thing that could happen for me. And so ultimately the winners have been the employers, the business owners have been the winners, because as you can see on the graphs on the right, productivity has been increasing. But the real wages, what's happening with the real wages? Well, they're remaining stagnant, especially after second wave feminism really cultivated itself in reality as something that's a norm. And ironically, these two graphs are usually used by communists and socialists, right? They will say, well, this is because of the capitalist system. Well, that's really, it's too simple, right? It's too simple. There's a lot of nuance that's going on. There's a lot of effects. There's a lot of reasons why productivity has increased and the real wages have been stagnant. And I'm just pointing out that one of the major reasons why this happened is because of second wave feminism. And arguing against it will be very, very, very difficult. But of course, you can't point this out in the real world today, especially as an academic, because academicians are obviously, there's a lot of politics behind it. Pointing this out, especially today, will be social suicide. And you will be pretty much saying that women should not work. And if you say women should not work, well, suddenly everyone wants you dead. You deserve the death penalty, right? So you can't really point this out in today's world, but this is the reality, folks. This is what happens when women start working. And having covered second wave feminism, now let's look at how social security and welfare puts a massive strain on the family. Well, right off the bat, this is very uncontroversial. Welfare and Social Security, it needs a lot of money, right? These are big, 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 big projects. There's a lot of people's mouths to feed. And you need a lot of money. How do you get the money? You're the government. How do you get money? Well, you get it from taxes, mostly. And it puts a massive strain on the budget, and this in turn requires that the government increase taxes. And as you can see on the top right, these are the budget estimations, like 2018 US budget estimations, and in total it's like $2.5 billion, I think, right? 2.4 trillion dollars. And these are all mandatory payments. These are all mandatory payments that the government has to do by law. Okay, this is all by law. So the amount is always going to rise up, but you have to pay these. And so it doesn't even cover the discretionary payments where you have, other forms of welfare done. And again, the point that I want to emphasize is that this puts a massive strain on tax budget. Now, if you have higher taxes, well, this is fairly obvious. If you have higher taxes and all those taxes go for people that are not working, or they're going for boomers that, they're just going to retire, well, you're going to have less money. And you might not even use any of the services that you're paying for. And most families don't really use these services at all. They don't really use these services as much as other groups. And because of that, you're going to have less money. Because you have less money, well, suddenly you're going to think, well, should I even have a family? Because it costs a lot. And speaking of should I even have a family in that aspect, Social Security is even a bigger culprit. Because with Social Security, there's a direct correlation with decreasing birth rates and Social Security taxes, right? So the amount of if the higher Social Security taxes you have, the lower birth rates you're gonna have. And the National Bureau of Economic Research they actually point this out. Now you might say, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that that's the cause. The cause might be something different. But no, actually, when you look at it logically, when you start to investigate this logically, you start to understand, yes, the cause is indeed Social Security. Let me check his name. So Oscar Jurikala from Mises Institute actually argues how this happens. So his main argumentation is basically this. He says that a form of Social Security before Social Security was your family, your own family, right? So just less than 100 years ago in Europe, the birth rates were 5. So you had 5 kids each family. Now, why do you have high birth rates? Well, you have high birth rates because you want to have as much kids as possible. So by the time you get old and you're unable to work, your kids will take up the mantle and they will support their family and they will support you as well. So you're basically investing in your children, and your children, the investment is being returned once you're done working, right? And that's how most families operated for millenniums, not even centuries, but millenniums. But now you have Social Security. Now you will 100%, no matter whether it doesn't matter if you have children or not, you're going to have payments, you're going to have security from the government, right? So you're out there, Jim old boomer, you're going, I could be having kids, I could be having families, not boomer, but Jim millennial is going, I could be having a family, but I'm already going to have security. So what's the point of having a family? Why should I even have a family? I'm already paying taxes for Social Security, for my own security, and I don't have enough money, I don't have enough cash to pay for my children. And so these people are not having children. Even if they're having families, they're not having as much children. And this is why you're seeing a correlation with Social Security and taxation. And ultimately, this also has a lot of implications when it comes to demographics, right? So if you take a look at the tax rates, just something off topic, but if you look at the tax rates in Europe, they're incredibly high. Even Ireland, the average tax rate is quite low compared to other European nations. 26% is still pretty high. Look at Germany. Half of your income is going to the government. Half of the money you earn. Do you think that the government gives half of that money you earn back to you? Of course not. They don't. It doesn't go back to you. It goes back to, I don't know, rape refugees that are raping your daughter. Probably goes to them, right? Or just money for people that don't eat, food for people that they don't even eat. There's like pictures of refugee camps that like they just straight up throw food without eating it to the trash because they already have better food, so they don't need the food. And these policies, as I mentioned before, put a lot of strain on taxes. And because there's a lot of strain on taxes, well, this is what happens. You don't have enough money. And can you really blame people for not having enough money to look after other people? How can you expect a family who both has to work, husband and wife has to work together? How do you think they can afford to have more than 3 children, more than 3 kids? And the wife is not even at home. They're both working full time. So now they have to spend money for some dumb retard to look after their kids. What if that dumb retard is not even a good parent? What happens? Even if he is good at his job or her job, your children, the parents of your children is him or her. It's not you. It's not the family. So you might as well not have children. And people are starting to realize that people are ceasing to have families. I will argue, this is the main reason why people are not having families anymore. And if you look at the graph on right, you're seeing the birth rates of European Union nations. Now, what's the sustainment rate? What's the sustainment rate for a first world nation, first world European nation. 2.1. As you can see here, not a single nation is sustainable. They're not sustaining themselves. What does this mean? Well, it means, well, let's understand this first. The economic system that we're set under is continuous growth, right? You need to have continuous growth in order to sustain this economy. This is one of the uh, main points for Keynesian economics, continuous growth. And actually, this is one of the arguments that Austrian economists use against Keynesians. They say continuous growth is not sustainable. You can't have continuous growth. It's impossible. And while, of course, at times there are places where Austrian economics are wrong, Austrian economics, I will say, have a lot of insight in this regard. So their argument is that you can't sustain this, and we're seeing it here. You can't sustain it because the very policies you're trying to have continuous growth with, those same policies are also disabling you from having growth because you can't have, because they decrease the amount of people that want to have families. Less families, less birth rates. It's as simple as that. So this leads people to think that they need refugees, that they need immigrants. So you will look out for first world countries, right? But wait a minute, other first world countries, they also have the same problem. So where are you looking? Yes, you're looking at Africa, you're looking at Asia, and ultimately you're looking at third world immigrants. So these third world immigrants, they're not doctors, they're not surgeons, they're not engineers. A lot of them, they don't do that. They might do simple jobs, but even economically speaking, they don't help you out. And so this caused a massive demographic issue. And I actually make this argument that when you look at the demographic tree, right, you have an abundance of people who are 50 years old, 40 years old, right? 40-year-old, 50-year-old people are a huge group. They surpass most other age groups. So if you fast forward 20 years later, those people are going to retire. They're going to take money from Social Security. Are there enough people to sustain that? Well, no. You have more people that use these services, but that use the economy, so to say, but you don't have enough people sustaining and contributing to the economy, right? Because you don't have high birth rates. And so what's going to happen is that there's going to be more strain to the economy. But what's going to happen? Perhaps more taxes, perhaps economic recession, whole bunch of stuff that can go back. And as a matter of fact, the Social Security website itself, Social Office of Retirement and Disability Policy, they themselves admit today, well, not today, but they themselves admitted in 2010 that Social Security, that the program is most likely going to run out in the US by late 2020s or late 2030s, right? So they're saying, so basically between 10 and 20 years, Social Security is going to run out. So it's not going to be running on a surplus anymore. And again, when you factor all of this together, you start to realize in what ways, how economics has been weaponized against the family. And ultimately, what are we supposed to do? What can we do? Well, I will point out that ultimately these things are dependent on the system, right? It's not the system of capitalism. It's the political system. It's the judicial system. Because as I mentioned before, second wave feminism has been codified in the law. Women are encouraged to work. You have now the government enforcing quotas. If you don't have this amount of women in your business, well, you know what? We're just going to cancel your business. We're just going to make you lose your business. And there's nothing you can do against it because I have the army, you don't. So businesses are forced to do this. there's no way around it. So the problem really is about the system. And what I personally think is going to be kind of a doomsday thing, but what I personally think is that in 10 or 20 years maximum, in between 10 or 20 years maximum, there's going to be a mega economic collapse, and a lot of bad stuff's going to, I don't want to go into too much detail, but a lot of bad stuff's going to happen. So I think the best way for us is to pray about it, pray to God that nothing bad happens to us. Probably it will, and we're going to be seeing a radical change in modern life because of all this. And to recap this video, I will say that ever since 1960s and even before that, as prototypes, let's say post World War II, right? After World War II, the West in general has used certain economic policies that had tremendous negative consequences. These policies are, as I mentioned before, second wave feminism, social security, welfare, and the consequences are showing them, they're showing themselves even today, but they're going to really manifest into something terrible in the future. These policies are especially against the family. The elite is especially weaponizing economics against the family, because all of these policies are basically making it much of it's making the prospect of having a family is much worse today. And because that is the case, people are not having families, and because people are not having families, well, are people going to care about children? Not anymore. People are not caring about children anymore. People are not caring about their future anymore. It's all about the present. And as I mentioned before, this side, the way economics has been weaponized against us is nothing short of terrible. But that will end the video here. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for making this far. This was kind of a long video, and God bless all of you. Hopefully we'll see you in the next video.